Hey everybody, saw Batman vs. Superman, and here in voiceover are my thoughts. First and foremost, I gave the movie a 6.5 out of 10. That's on the IMDb scale, which by the way is basically the best movie rating scale ever invented as far as I'm concerned, since it uses the wisdom of crowds. 6.5 is a good score. It means it's notably above average for a movie, had some good moments and so on, but also fell short in a few ways. And the IMDb scale uses the whole 1 to 10 scale, and really does reflect the extremes of the scale and the middle of the scale accurately. The highest rated movie on IMDb is not a perfect 10, it's about a 9.2. And the lowest rated stuff is around a 1.6. And that's definitely what I decided. It's not a 6.0 and not a 7.0, it's a 6.5. And this falls below the movie's current average rating of 7.3, which means I liked the movie slightly less than most people. So here we go. First and foremost, let's talk about the casting. I'm pretty indifferent to Henry Cavill. I think women like him much better because he's apparently good looking. He has a pretty good look for the part, but for my taste, and this is probably up to what Zack Snyder directed him to do, he was a bit too angry in general. One of the things Christopher Reeve and Richard Donner pulled off so well was the idea that Superman is at heart an innocent and kind-hearted person who just happens to have godlike power. When Superman acts in those movies, he acts because he has to, and he's all about comforting people. And when dealing with bad people, his look is serious but almost disappointed or kind of unfortunate, like, you're forcing me to put you under control. He wasn't angry or dangerous, and stuff like that makes a difference. But that didn't really stand out to me. The other casting mattered more. I really liked Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. There's that balance you have to strike between aesthetic appeal and physicality and intensity in superheroes, and I thought she could do both. And she's Israeli actually, but that bit of accent, that bit of unfamiliarity in her body language and how she acted helped sell the idea that she's not a normal person, she's from somewhere else, so I dug that. On the other hand, there was Ben Affleck, which was the most controversial decision, and I was not down with that decision at all. A lot of other people didn't care. This is because I think some people were around for the Geely era and some people weren't. And if you don't know what I just said, just consider yourself lucky. And you probably like the movie better. You may also find his face less recognizable and thus more believable as Batman. But anyway, beyond that, I think there were bad decisions made with his performance too. I don't know if it was him or the director, but he frowns through the whole movie. Yes, Batman's parents were killed. Depression is a believable response, but it's not the only believable response. You could also accept the situation and act to prevent it in the future, instead of coming off like a sad sack. People don't like sad sacks, and people who wallow in their self-pity. We like people who try to solve their problems. So people who notice this won't respond as well to this version of Batman. And decisions like that are difficult. I don't know if they teach it in acting class. Great actors tend to figure those things out, and I don't think it was done in this case, to put it mildly. I'll focus on the voice of Batman later, but also, because of the Geely era and other things, Ben Affleck basically brings a lot of negative external emotions, which I call alpha emotions, into the role. And like we've talked about, those further get in the way of enjoying the performance. The bat dreams also. Dream sequences generally cause problems because people like to believe what they see in stories. And the dream sequences are kind of a waste of time in that regard. And I think they were just trying to stick in more action scenes. But overall, I didn't like that casting decision, and I had to try not to pay attention to it. Okay, Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. It seemed to me like he was doing a combination of Heath Ledger and actually Arcade, who's a Marvel villain with long red hair who wears white coats and bow ties and acts like the Joker a little bit. I swear, for some reason or another, he was doing Arcade, or it was influenced by that character. I don't know why, though. I think the character also did very little to help the movie. Heath Ledger's Joker had cool hair and a cool voice, but a large part of what made that character so loved was, 1, all the things he got to do in the movie, clever, devious, badass, etc., the pencil trick, the fairy bombs, burning the money, and so on. 2, how other characters in the movie reacted to him, which is a big thing that we often don't notice. We get our emotional cues often from how other people speak about someone, and that quote, "Some men want to watch the world burn," was a big deal. And lastly, the alpha emotions, the external emotions that mixed with the movie after Heath Ledger's death. If you haven't seen the Alpha Factor video, go watch it and listen to the podcast if you want more. None of that was there with Jesse Eisenberg's performance and his character. So he ends up copying some of the mannerisms, but basically getting none of the effect. Now, the character wasn't bad by itself, but I think it ended up taking away from the movie because it was a symptom of the overall issue, which is that the movie just tried to do way too much. They threw so much spaghetti against the wall that it ended up being a mess. And this is really common. I used to see it all the time in books and screenplays. They try to impress or satisfy you by dumping 10 tons of plot points on you, and it just doesn't work. We're only wired to take in so much information at a time. You have to give the amount of information that we're naturally able to take in, and do it in such a way that it's the most emotionally effective. In short, it has to be quality, not quantity. It's a classic mistake, and actually, as a side note, they talk about this in cooking shows too. I like to relax by watching stuff I know nothing about so I don't think about it, like gourmet cooking. And on Kitchen Nightmares, Gordon Ramsay tells the chefs that they have to keep it simple. And I'm always like, yeah, that's in movies too. But again, people resist it because they worry that it won't be impressive or they think they can do more. But this simplicity thing is not doing less. You have to do no more than people can take in one sitting, whether it's a meal or a story, and actually deliver accurately. It's about making those limited choices correctly. And in this, they tried to give you Superman, Batman, Lex Luthor, Doomsday, Senator Finch, Wonder Woman, the death of Superman, the origin of Doomsday, and so on. It was just way too much. And on top of that, besides confusing you, I think they wasted money too. They obviously wanted to go the Avengers route, doing the multi-character cinematic universe, pocket all that cash like Marvel was doing. But Marvel built up to it. The Avengers comes after you meet the other characters, as a way to keep the train rolling. In this case, all they needed to do was Batman versus Superman. That's it. I don't think this would have done less money if it was just Superman versus Batman as a movie, and you save Wonder Woman, Doomsday, or whatever else for the sequel, where you actually set up the Justice League. I really believe they just threw away $1 billion by not doing it that way. Yes, some people will come in to see Wonder Woman for the first time, but you get those people to come to the sequel. And people who would have come to see Batman versus Superman and also would have come to see Wonder Woman or Doomsday are only going to come for this one. You know, you can only sell one ticket at a time. So things were a little bit out of control. And that brings us to the overall writing and some other stuff that I think is pretty interesting. Because the movie was so jumbled, they lost one of the most important things, which is the plot. The plot is the reason to pay attention to the movie. It's the character's goal, the main question, or some source of tension. You know, Rocky is trying to win the world title, or who committed the murder, and so on. If you don't know what that is, what they're trying to do, or what the question is, you won't follow the plot. You'll be confused, and in some cases even walk out of the movie or put the book down. And that happened to me here. Now, I was in a theater where, of course, there were plenty of kids seeing the movie who made noise and, in several cases, walked up to me and over me. You know, I would prefer to watch it and have subtitles so I get everything. But in the conditions where I saw it, I didn't get the plot. I knew Superman and Batman met each other, and I knew Superman blew up the Wayne building. Beyond that, Lex Luthor, a wheelchair blowing up, the politics, some stolen disc. I don't know what was going on. Christopher Nolan tends to lose his logic and clarity a bit too, but in his case, basically, it's on things you don't notice until later, so he gets away with it more. In this case, I knew it while I was watching, so I think they made big mistakes on the writing. But, and here's the cool thing, I think this is a part of why some people really hate this movie and others don't. Because even though I didn't get the plot, I had other reasons to be interested. Like I said, I was interested in Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, and one of the major reasons I was watching was to see how they handled her character. Was it going to work well? When is she going to show up as Wonder Woman? And so on. And again, this is another aspect of alpha emotions. That question in my head functioned exactly the same in terms of keeping me interested in what I was seeing, as if I was wondering who committed the murder, who shot JR, or whatever else you'd actually write into a plot. It's the same emotion being triggered. That's how alpha emotions work. So even though the movie was really overwritten and a bit confusing, I was able to watch it and care about it as though it wasn't. And when Wonder Woman shows up, it's actually, I think, the best scene in the movie. People cheer when she shows up. I don't know if they pulled this off on purpose, but she shows up at a very emotionally powerful moment. Superman's out of it, Batman is basically screwed by himself against Doomsday, and right when Doomsday goes to basically blast him to death, she shows up and blocks it as Wonder Woman, which is the first time we've seen her as Wonder Woman in the movie. This is a great example of our emotional reaction to our group, our society, improving. I call it enlightenment. The term doesn't matter. Our strongest emotional reaction is to when our worldview or our society gets stronger or better. Our second most powerful emotion is when it's reinforced. But here, this was the most powerful. And a new ally joining the team is very powerful, especially when they turn the tide of the battle too. Really, it's the most powerful thing we can see when we're not personally involved in the events. And that was that moment. And they pulled it off really well because you actually could get the situation. Superman was out of it. We saw that. Batman was done too, out of the jet. He couldn't physically match up against Doomsday and so on. I saw that. I realized it myself when he was flying the jet around. And if I get a few details wrong, forgive me. But anyway, the key was that I couldn't just describe to you what the situation was. They didn't just tell you the situation. It's that my brain could feel the situation. I grasped it. So when the tide turned, and of course the question of who she was answered, it confirmed that the good guys weren't done yet, which is solidifying our worldview, and it improved our side, and so on, all at once. When all that happened in that one moment, which my brain was aware of and wasn't confused about, it worked, and it was awesome. And it worked for everybody else too. Everybody cheered in the theater at that moment. So from that simple moment, well executed, you got the best scene in the movie. And that emotional response, understanding what you're seeing and having it be logical enough so that it triggers your belief and then gets your emotions going when the situation changes, is why we're at the movies. Similarly, the second best scene, in my opinion, was when we see the destruction of the Wayne building. The whole thing happens from the human perspective on the ground, when we see Superman fighting up in the sky. As viewers, we're so used to being up in the sky with the heroes that we get numb to it, and seeing it from the ground was more believable and less common. It's the same thing that made Cloverfield so good. I also thought Zod's dead body was very threatening. Anyway, the best scene, though, was the Wonder Woman reveal, because that had the positive emotions, whereas the Wayne building destruction was negative. And, of course, right after that scene with Wonder Woman, there was the bit with the kryptonite spear, where my first thought was, why on earth don't they just give it to Wonder Woman? She's obviously good with weapons and can fight Doomsday, but they didn't do it because they had another plot point that they were trying to force into the movie. In this case, the death of Superman, which just didn't even have time for you to really feel it or for it to matter. So it was basically a waste. And that's another example of the problems with trying to do too much. You end up just fudging things to squeeze stuff in. And 10 fudged plot points are nowhere near as good as one plot point done well. It's just essentially the fact of the matter. If you just cut the death of Superman stuff, you're freed up to follow how it feels it should go. And then Wonder Woman could use the spear to hurt Doomsday. Then maybe Superman finishes him off, Batman arrests Lex Luthor, whatever. The key point is that you're freed up to flesh out what you have properly. But nonetheless, this all springs from that Wonder Woman moment which worked so well for me, and the build-up to it, which kept me watching. But what if you didn't share that interest? What if you didn't care much for Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman? Well, there we go. That, I think, brings us to the core of why some people really liked the movie and others didn't. You see, that interest, seeing how it was going to be pulled off, filled in my need for a reason to pay attention to the movie. That external interest filled in for what the plot was supposed to do but didn't, because it was so confusing. If you didn't have that reason, all you had was that plot, and so you probably didn't have any interest besides waiting for Batman and Superman to fight. You were just fidgeting, confused, probably annoyed, and so on. And so, you literally had a different emotional experience from watching the same movie. And you'll probably give it a much worse score than 6.5, and a much worse review. And we've seen a lot of critics give it a bad review. By the same token, if you had no issue with Ben Affleck, you would like Batman much more in the movie. Your response would be different. You might be watching to see how they handle Batman, or you might have even picked up on some key plot point when I was distracted by the kid standing in front of me and staring at me. And you thus would rate it higher than 6.5, which I think happened with most people and is a major reason why the average score is above mine. And that's one of the cool things about the IMDb rating and the wisdom of crowds. If it disagrees with what you think, it's a good starting point to find where you should start studying. Anyway, that's the cool thing here. Looking at the external emotions and seeing how they affect our experience of watching these things. The different reviews and so on, they start to make sense. We don't just have feature bias where we see that the plot was confusing or the ending was cool, assume that's all that was going on to make the movie good or bad, then get angry at everyone else for lying or not being smart enough to see what we see. We can really understand each other this way and start to see what's going on. But from my perspective, because there were a couple good scenes I liked a few of the casting decisions, and the missing elements of the plot were filled in by the external factors, I had an above average experience. But let me mention one more thing. All these things add up. Yes, I had interest in the movie because I wanted to see how Wonder Woman was handled and the Batman versus Superman fight, even though I wasn't following the plot. But in the best movies, you have everything working. Not just the external emotions, but the internal ones too. The ones from the writing itself, which I just call the beta emotions. You get all of it together. That's how you get the extreme emotion that we associate with our absolute favorite stuff. Now, of course, they were trying to deliver something on that level. And I do occasionally struggle with this, which is the question of whether you should rate movies for effort or result. Because, like we talked about in the M. Night Shyamalan video, good movies are really hard to make, and that effort and enthusiasm can be lost if it's not appreciated. But I don't want to risk falling into the idea of rating via checkbox, as in, there was some supposedly psychological or more mature stuff that I should care about, like the Martha thing, so I should bump it up for that. It checked off that box. But the stuff, for me, didn't really work. I didn't buy the Martha thing. My brain didn't feel that situation, nor buy it when Batman and Superman suddenly became friends and so on. And rating via checkbox is dangerous because you can end up giving something a high score that doesn't actually deliver. It's like rating your food on the color, texture, presentation, and so on, and not whether it tastes good. If the elements don't come together, then it may have a good score. Your rating scale may predict that it's good and that you'd like more or others should like more, while in reality, people stop coming. If the stuff doesn't actually work, people won't get what they came for, even though it looks like they should. And they'll just drift off to doing other things with their time, and won't even realize why they liked going to the movies unless or until they see something that does work. But in the meantime, you're bleeding off viewers. So I can't rate the movie based on the effort or the attempt. I have to go by the actual result, and what actually worked for me. But of course, I will take every emotional aspect into account, since that does affect how much people enjoy their experience and how much I do too. And we need to know what we will or won't like and what others will by consulting our ratings. So with that in mind, in terms of the actual emotional functioning of the film, it had limited internal stuff that worked, and the external stuff filled in some of the essential things for me. So it was watchable, but due to the issues with the actual writing of the story and a few other missing things, the overall experience of it, while not missing anything huge, was generally pretty thin and didn't reach any great height, making it above average and thus overall for me a 6.5. Alright, that's pretty much the first real movie review I've done on this channel. I feel like movie reviews are everywhere, so I wasn't thinking too much about doing them. So let me know what you think about it, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.